So welcome everybody to this meeting of the Rotary Club of Leicester. It's the 10th of May 2021. Just looking for any guests that we have joining us. I believe Richard invited somebody. Hasn't Richard, do you know about your guests? Are they looking to arrive at some point today? I'll keep an eye out for them.
Well, it's Philip. If he does turn up, he turns up.
All right. I don't want to miss him. So okay, I will keep my eyes peeled.
Up. You know who it is.
I'll keep my eyes peeled. Thank you.
Sometime colleague and golf partner.
Excellent. Okay, I can see Pam. Always great to have you with us, Pam.
Thank you.
How are you? Are you okay?
Fine, thank you.
Good. And how's your club?
Yeah, we're doing well. No real news from the club, but if I can sort of take 2 minutes of your time just to draw members' attention, if they don't know, to an event happening at Leicester Cathedral for 3 weeks from next Monday. You may have been to us when we had the moon. Well, this time we've got the Earth, Gaia. So you can find out all about it on the Cathedral website.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, right. I can't see anything. We have our speaker, which is always good. Welcome, Ivor. Okay, now just before I move on, any greetings from other clubs? No. Okay. I just wanted to show you a little something. We had a member you may remember from a Rotarian from Calcutta join us. I think she joined us about 3 weeks ago, and she runs a bunch of. She's a school principal by day, and runs a bunch of homes for disadvantaged school children and vulnerable women and elderly over in her district of Calcutta. I mean, she may have mentioned, I think she did mention actually on the call that it's something that was quite surprising to me. Elderly women were being sort of dumped at various hospitals and train stations by their children who just couldn't afford to look after them anymore. And her charity was involved in taking those people and rehoming them and giving them food and somewhere to live. So she's doing a fantastic service out there, and she contacted us asking for a donation of Android mobile phones. I believe everybody had an email about that, and I'd like to publicly thank Moira. She donated a big bulk of the phones, 4 very good smartphones. So as a club we donated altogether 6 mobile phones. I just wanted to show you all a picture of that. And I was just saying to Moira before this call during the council meeting, so hopefully you can all see that if you give me a thumbs up. Does that picture come up? Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so that's me. I met her in Watermead Park, handed over the phones there, and it was very heartwarming to see this, which she sent me back. It was really nice. This is one of the phones. The children are using it, so it's my first thought was, wow, that's really nice, but secondly it was it's quite sad really. They're struggling so much for devices to work on that they have to share a single phone between them for their schoolwork. So I've gone back to Camille because she has contacted me to ask whether our club can provide any other support because of the COVID situation out there, as many of you will know, in India is very difficult. And she said that's also affected her donations and things like that. So I contacted her whether she would like any more phones or any of the support we can provide. I believe sending phones in the post may be tricky because of customs and other issues we may come across. So I'm just in discussions with her as to anything else we can do for her because she's really working hard for her community out there, and it'd be nice to help those children further. Okay, we do have an EGM. So did everybody receive the email about the 2 items for that? Yes, okay, so there's 2 items. First of all, that the club adopts the additions to the Constitution regarding family membership. And that was the email for that was circulated to members on the 1st of May. Secondly, a benevolent donation of £200, which was also outlined in the document attached, titled Benevolent Donation Woolen Karma. So everybody, okay, so everyone will see that. I have had a message from Barry. John Nisbet, Babs Marson, Vince Slark and John Knight support both proposals, and Bob Collins supports the benevolent donation and abstains on family membership. I believe Rodney wanted to propose an addition?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to propose an amendment to the resolution that's been circulated. But first of all, I would like to say, and it gives me an opportunity to say, my congratulations to those involved in putting forward this imaginative way of getting younger members into the club, and congratulations. One of the great privileges of membership of Rotary itself is to visit other clubs around the world. And I know that a lot of our members have. And therefore, I'd just like to make it clear in this new acceptance of family members that they understand that that privilege will only be extended to them when they become a member. So the amendment to the resolution that I proposed, and I'm pleased to receive your support for that, Parmdeep and Barry, is that under item G, 1.4, which are things that are not, privileges which are not extended to the family member, I would like to add that they will not be eligible to attend a meeting of any other Rotary Club except at the invitation and guest of a member of that club. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. Okay, so could I have a proposer? Chris, thank you. And a seconder? Yes, Patrick, thank you. And vote all those in favour? Okay, anybody not in favour? That's including me. Okay, that's passed. Thank you. At this point, I'd just like to, I've got some exciting news I'd like to share with you. Nick Thompson, will be becoming president-elect, and Tara Pankania will be junior vice president. So we have, post my year, we have Scott as president of the club, and then we're going to have Nick, followed by Tara Pankania. I hope Tara gets back in one piece. She's in India, so she had a bit of a struggle trying to get back. She said the situation was quite dire where she is. She did say to me she wasn't able to leave her home, and when she did, she was just in a car to drive around, and the situation was so bad. She was kind of seeing people who died on the street and things like that. So yeah, so she rang me over the weekend and seemed very glad to be getting home. Okay, we have various initiatives that we're working on, and we'll be able to tell you more about them once we've got them finalised. Particularly volunteering initiatives, and I thank particularly Nick for the hard work he's been doing on that to get some of the projects underway with that. We've also got the Netherhall School project, which is going very well. Dan has been working very hard with that. We're going to need some volunteers to help put the garden together. We've had some very exciting designs sent in by the students of the neighbouring school next to the Netherhall School, which I believe is the Orchard Mead Academy. Used to be Hamilton School when I was a kid. So yeah, we're going to be proceeding with that, and that's going well. Oh, I believe a guest has joined us, Philip. Oh, there we go. Welcome, Philip, friend of Richard's, colleague. Nice to have you with us. Okay. Right, so do we have any notices from Secretary Barry? No, none today. Okay. Anything from any committee chairmen or women? No, nothing to report. Okay. So this week we have our speaker, Ivor Perry, and he'll be speaking to us about the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who we are. So thank you very much, Ivor, and please take it away. I'll just, you just need to go ahead and unmute yourself. I'll set up the slide sharing. Okay, slide sharing is enabled. You'll just need to unmute yourself.
Right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. And let's see, can you see the slides? Or the first slide?
Not yet. I'll just
No.
check your settings are okay.
Share screen.
Yeah, you should be able to. There we go. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we can all see, we can all hear. That's that's a great improvement on the rest of my life. Okay, what I'm going to do today is to give a very general introduction to the War Graves Commission and its work and its reach and so on. A lot of you will already know stuff about this, and if I'm telling you stuff that you already know, I apologize, but there's a huge amount to say about the War Graves Commission, and this particular presentation just gives you the flavor for it. So we'll start off with a quick video. And this video just gives you a flavor for where it is and what it does. Right, well, that's the presentation then. We can all go and have a cup of tea. I hope you were taking notes. There'll be questions at the end. But it does give you a very, very quick overview of some of the stuff that the Commission gets up to. So we're going to start off with who are we? Picture on the left, by the way, is of the cemetery at Thiepval on the Somme. And we're going to have a look at some numbers, first of all. The numbers are truly mind-boggling. 1.7 million Commonwealth servicemen and women commemorated, over 1 million headstones that the Commission maintains, 23,000 locations around the world, 153 countries. There really are some enormous numbers that the Commission plays with. I want to get into some more detail, so I'll pass on that one. What I would say, by the way, is if you want to ask questions, I'd really prefer it if you can wait to the end. If you are absolutely burning to ask a question, then do find a way of stopping me, and I'll take it. Okay. So the member governments of the Commission are all those who were combatants within the British Empire, the British Commonwealth, in the First and Second World Wars. And the funding comes from those governments. Nationality, as far as a casualty is concerned, depends on which government was funding their regiment or unit. So, for example, someone of an Indian ethnicity who was a member of the Singapore Garrison Artillery, is actually classed as UK because it's the UK that funded the Singapore Artillery. So each government pays on a proportional basis according to how many headstones they commemorate. Memorials, by the way, are not taken into consideration on this. And therefore, for example, India's contribution, although a lot of Indian citizens were killed in both world wars, the Indian government's contribution is smaller because so many of the Indian casualties were cremated according to their own faith, and therefore there are no headstones and they're commemorated on memorials. So it's the headstones that are really the crux of the money. Okay, let's look at some of the origins of the commission. This is a man that I find absolutely fascinating, Fabian Ware. And the one thing I will say about Fabian Ware is he was probably the best networker I've ever read about. You could take lessons from this man. And if you're in business today, then you should take lessons from this man. He started out as a school teacher, became a newspaper journalist and editor. And at the beginning of the Great War, he volunteered. He too old to fight, but he and another group of gentlemen took out a series of Rolls-Royce ambulances to the Western Front to help out with the Army Medical Corps and with the French Army Medical Corps. I'll come back to that in a minute. Up until the First World War, the British other ranks, if you will, had very little commemoration. Go to the Crimea, where are they? In mass graves that, mostly in mass graves that are now lost. It started to change with the Boer War, with some memorialization of individual other ranks, but it really changed with Fabian Ware. Fabian Ware goes to the Western Front, approaches the British Adjutant General on the Western Front in late 1914 and says, I think we should be recording the dead and where they are, because after the war, people are going to want to know. The Adjutant General said, well, I was thinking of doing that anyway, so why don't you join us? And quite quickly, over a matter of months, Ware and his group were subsumed into the army under the Directorate of War Graves and Inquiries. And he continued in this, liaising very closely with the French. He was a fluent French speaker and had lived in France. And that is critical, by the way, in my opinion, to the early success of the commission, that he got on the right side of the French government. Towards the end of the war, it says in the official histories, he was asked by the Prince of, he was recommended by the Prince of Wales to press for the setup of a War Graves Commission. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Prince of Wales did not come up with that idea. You're looking at the man who came up with that idea and found a way of getting at the Prince of Wales and suggesting that the Prince should suggest that, and he did. And the commission itself really got started in 1918. Just about the first thing Ware did was to get hold of the Director General of the British Museum, a guy called Sir Frederick Kenyon, who was a very, very interesting bloke, museum curator, archaeologist, historian, art lover and art critic and so on, who spent about 8 months talking to all kinds of people about what should happen and came up with some radical, for the time, suggestions, like each of the imperial dead should be commemorated by name on a headstone or memorial. That those headstones and memorials should be permanent. The phrase you see all the time is in perpetuity. And the headstones should be of a uniform size and design with no distinction for rank or status. And what is not on here as well is that burial should be, again, without regard to rank or status, so that in the burials after the Great War, you find that officers and men are buried together. This had never been done before. And we take it for granted nowadays. It is our British tradition, we say. This British tradition was invented in 1918. Each headstone with its uniform design has the dates of the casualty, the name, and usually the regimental rank, a badge of the regiment or the unit, and those were designed, by the way, or decided by the individual regiments. Underneath that is a space for a religious emblem. Now, when the final verification forms were sent out by the commission to the relatives after the war, the commission suggested that they could choose a religious emblem if they wanted. The default position was if they said nothing, they'd get a cross. So if you didn't want a cross, you had to say so. And you were entirely at liberty to ask for a Star of David or a Quranic inscription or something that appealed to, that was relative to your own religion. And those requests were, by and large, adhered to. We can talk a bit about that afterwards. But it was quite an astonishing development on the part of the British government. Who qualifies for a headstone? Well, as to the first two wars, these are the qualifying dates, and they apply to anyone who was serving with the armed forces, the merchant navy, or certain auxiliary services. The dates are quite simple as far as the first dates are concerned. 4th of August 14, 3rd of September 1939. That's when war broke out in each case. So that's when war was declared. The end dates are not quite so simple. The First World War technically ended with this signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, but it took a while for all the competent nations to sign up. I think Hungary signed in 1921. Turkey didn't even sign until 24. And the British government passed an act declaring that hostilities were officially ended on 31st of August 1921. So that was the date that the commission took. With the Second World War, again, it was ended by a series of accessions to treaties. But there was no act of parliament actually declaring an end to hostilities. So the commission got together with all the other member governments and decided that the last day of December 47, December 47 was the day to finish it all. So that's the qualifying dates and the qualifying personnel. The actual work was phenomenal. Nothing like it had ever been attempted. The First World War resulted in the deaths of over 1 million British and imperial servicemen and women. In the same period, 2.5 million French, 2 million Germans, and 4 million Russians died. So trying to account for everybody was a phenomenal undertaking. And it's just as well that Weir's group had been at it since 1914, so they had some very good records. But after the war, there was obviously the question of clearing the battlefields, and remains were being discovered all over the place. Additionally, there were a lot of small cemeteries that had been established during the war, but they were too small to be viable. So these smaller cemeteries were concentrated into larger ones. And most of the larger cemeteries that you see nowadays have an element of concentration in them. And it's in these concentration cemeteries that you see how officers and men lie side by side. If you go to some of the cemeteries that were operative during the war, particularly the ones in hospitals, for example, like Étaples or Rouen, you will see because these burials were being carried out during the war, before the commission was founded, you will see sections for officers, sections for Jewish people, and sections for nurses and so on. But the work of the commission at the end of the Great War was a monumental undertaking. The first thing was, of course, to construct the cemeteries and bury the dead. And here you can see the cemeteries with the early wooden crosses. And many of these wooden crosses, as they were replaced, were in fact offered to relatives back home. And you could actually, if you asked, pay for the wooden cross to be sent home. And occasionally in churches and so on to this day, you will see examples of the original wooden cross being brought in. A few words about the global commitment. To give you some idea of the size of the undertaking, most of the graves, obviously, because so much of the fighting was in Europe, are in Europe. But there are large numbers of graves all over the world. And if you look at some of the really big sites, which tend to be, again, on the old Western Front, you'll see, for example, Tyne Cot on the left and Thiepval on the right. Tyne Cot was designed by Baker, one of the three principal architects. Happy to talk about the architects at the end if you like. Tyne Cot is the largest war grave cemetery in Europe, with 12,000 graves. And at the back, you can see this semicircular wall, which contains the names of about 35,000 British and New Zealand casualties who have no known grave, who died after late 1917. So Tyne Cot is a classic, massive concentration ceremony. 70% of the graves there are unknown, just being brought in from the battlefields of Flanders. On the right, Thiepval, designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, commemorates 54,000, I think, or is that? Yeah. No, sorry, Thiepval commemorates 70,000 who have no known grave and who were killed during the battles of the Somme. And at the back of the Thiepval, we're looking at it from the back at the moment, there is a cemetery with, as you can see, British graves on the left and French graves on the right. The French have a standard cross, except in the case of Muslim French soldiers, which have a pointed shape to the headstone. The British headstones, of course, are the standard ones. Now, this slide is just intended to give you an idea of the global reach. It really is phenomenal. Goodness knows why we have 5 graves in Chile, but there you are. Some poor souls died or were washed up on the shores of Chile and are buried there. And you can see, if you look around, wherever you go, you will come across some British war graves. I remember driving through Romania from Bucharest up to Transylvania a few years ago. And then suddenly I'm driving along this road and there's a British war cemetery on the right. And it took me a while to find out why we had British soldiers in Romania. And I stopped and had a look, and some of course were bomber crew from the Second World War, but some were guys who died in hospital in Bucharest from sickness when they were on the Black Sea in the First World War. So these give you some idea of what the different cemeteries might look like. Singapore, the top, you've got Gallipoli Beach Cemetery at Gallipoli, and the top right is the Baza Memorial in Iraq. And in the middle, the top is the Kranji Military Cemetery and the Singapore Memorial. You find that memorials are very often on the same site as a cemetery. The cemetery in Hong Kong, I think it's the Sai Wan War Cemetery there. And then, of course, you see a single grave in the UK. And you will find in most English cemeteries and in a lot of English churchyards, the occasional standard uniform headstone of a war grave. Because there are over 185,000 personnel buried in the UK. Now, to be buried in the UK, it might at first seem a bit odd because in 1915, early in 1915, the army forbade repatriation of bodies. So people who died overseas were buried overseas. However, a lot of personnel died in hospital or in training accidents or from air raids. And some, of course, would be killed in coastal action, their bodies washed up on the seashore. So there are some cemeteries like this one at Shortcliffe on the left that are British war cemeteries. And there are others that just contain a few graves. I mean, this one on the top right, which is in Scotland, just has a few individual graves. And they normally, and they all should be, marked with that green and white sign saying that there are Commonwealth War Graves here. You will also see that a lot of places in the UK have local stone, not the Portland stone, which is the common war grave. This one at the bottom right there is in Cornwall, and it's from Cornish slate. You'll also see, for example, in Scotland, a lot of granite used because of the weather conditions in the north of Scotland. They asked me to do something about somebody local, and I thought I'd pick this one. Grimston, I don't know if anyone knows where Grimston is, but it's kind of, thank you, Richard. It's quite clear, near to the Loughborough to Melton Mowbray Road and very close to the village of Old Dalby with a splendid pub. Used to have a splendid pub called the Crown. It's a small village, and in the churchyard, I just came across this one. And I saw that the guy had died at Rugeley Camp in 1917 and wanted to know a little bit more. And I found out that that headstone is actually maintained by the War Graves Commission. The lad concerned died of psithis or psithis. I have no idea how you pronounce it, but it translated at the time roughly to TB. And you'll see at the bottom there's an epitaph that says safe home. Well, that means, I guess, safe home, his body has been returned from where he died in Rugeley when he was still in training. But it also is found in a number of hymns of the day. And a lot of epitaphs that we see do have quotations from hymns. Sometimes they're quotations that nowadays we wouldn't recognize as hymns. That gives you an idea of what you can find off the War Graves website. This is the details relating to the headstone itself. This card was started in 1927, as you can see in the bottom right. It tells us what unit he was with. Interestingly, for those who are interested in military history, when he died, he was with the 5th Training Reserve Battalion. That's been crossed out because just after he died in May 1917, the Training Reserve Battalion, which was a battalion of the Leicesters, changed its name to 10th Battalion, I think it was, training brackets of the Leicester Regiment. So he's down there as being in the Leicester Regimental Depot, and he's got a regimental number from the Leicesters rather than from the Training Reserve Battalion. But there's a lot of information that you can get from the War Graves Commission. On to other nationalities. I'm sorry if I'm rushing, by the way, but there's quite a lot to get through, even though this is just a general flyby, if you like. You will see in War Graves Commission cemeteries a number of other nationalities. Germans, obviously, where German remains were buried in British cemeteries during the war and concentrated into British cemeteries after war. Czech graves in the middle. I saw quite a few in Normandy, for example, and Polish graves as well. Normally these graves in British cemeteries are maintained by the War Graves Commission, but the War Graves Commission does so under contract from the home countries that these people came from. So, and by the same token, British graves that are in cemeteries maintained by the German organization or the French or the Polish are maintained by them, and we compensate them for doing so. So it's a truly international effort. Finally, to a section on the work continuing. The Menin Gate, I don't know if anyone has been to the Menin Gate at 8 o'clock. Yeah, good. Which has been, the local fire brigade sound the last post, for those who haven't, at 8 o'clock every night. And that's been going on every night since the mid-20s, apart from a few years in the 1940s when that nice Mr. Hitler was in charge and didn't like music or something. It's a very, very moving experience. And if you haven't been, I would recommend anyone to go. It's a memorial, this one designed by the third principal architect, Sir Reginald Blomfield, and this has the names of 54,000 men from the empire who died in the area of Ypres and Flanders generally. There is also a number of architectural and styles that you will see around, and architectural bits and pieces. On the top left is a huge stone of remembrance, which you will find in the cemeteries over 1,000, with 1,000 graves and more. Edwin Lutyens designed that, and he designed it as a place for focusing thought for people of all religions and none. That said, in correspondence, he did refer to it as the Great Altar Stone, and Rudyard Kipling always called it the Great Altar Stone, and it does have a Christian inscription. Their name liveth forevermore comes from Ecclesiasticus, which is in the Apocrypha of the Bible. I can talk more about that one as well. Bottom left, you see the Cross of Sacrifice designed by Reginald Blomfield. Most of the cemeteries will have one of these. Not always of the same size. Bigger the cemetery on the whole, the bigger the cross. Also, the base varies in size. This one is very, very large. Sometimes you'll just see the base with one layer and a cross that is maybe 2.5 meters high. Some will go to 4 meters high. And the styles of architecture will range from almost Victorian modernist through to really Art Deco. And they really are worth looking at in their own right, because they were designed by some very, very creative architects of the time, only the best. Reconstruction, however, is something that goes on all the time. Sometimes it's major. This is at Habania in Iraq, which is now a base operated by the Iraqi army, was an RAF base. Sometimes reconstruction is necessary because of war, as in the case of Iraq. Sometimes, very rarely, vandalism. Most often because of the weather. And you will constantly see walls being rebuilt, headstones being replaced as they are eroded, and so on. That never stops. So the work of the Commission really is in perpetuity. And the gardening that goes on. The planting, apparently, I've not actually seen the evidence for this in the archives, but the planting was designed initially by Gertrude Jekyll. So gardeners amongst you, you may well see the kind of colours and plants that you're used to in Jekyll gardens. They are beautiful. If you go to a cemetery, you will probably see at some point the gardeners working there. If you do, and if you have any words of the local language, just say thank you, because they really do appreciate it, and they do a phenomenal job in my experience. The archive of the War Graves Commission is phenomenal. In happier times, before pandemics, you could go and make an appointment and just go and study in the archives, and I've done that on a number of occasions. The people there are extremely helpful, and I'd recommend them to you very, very highly. So great archives. And the other rather sort of touching thing is every year the Commission finds or is pointed at the remains of 20 to 30 servicemen that are discovered by, usually by farmers ploughing or builders making new homes or roads. And they're always reburied with full military honours. Where they can be identified, they are. And if it's appropriate to take DNA samples and possible to take DNA, it isn't always possible, then relatives can be traced. Where relatives can be traced, they are usually invited to the reburial, which is normally in the closest cemetery to where the remains were found. And this is something that goes on every year and is, I think, one of the very touching things about the War Graves Commission work. So we get to the obligatory sort of plug for the organisation. There is this thing, the War Graves Foundation, which I do commend to everybody. And you can volunteer, you can give talks like I do, or you can help to maintain records in your local area. You can help maybe to clean brush away in the cemeteries, in the ordinary cemeteries, so that the war graves stand out. You can do all kinds of things. And you can work with kids there, as you can see. So I'm a member of the War Graves Foundation, as well as being a speaker, and I do commend it very highly to you. So, the very last thing, if you find yourself in France and anywhere near Arras, I cannot recommend this highly enough. I mean, I'm a cynical old so-and-so, and I've seen loads and loads of exhibitions of World War I stuff. But this goes behind the scenes of the War Graves Commission, and the amount of craftsmanship and skill that is still being used is absolutely unbelievable. The carpenter, by the way, at the top, these people for the gates and the frames of the buildings in the cemeteries is made of solid seasoned oak, and virtually all the work is done by hand. The iron fittings are blacksmithed in traditional ways. It is absolutely astonishing. So if you have a chance to go behind the scenes at Beaurains, absolutely do it. You will not be bored, I guarantee you. Okay, I think that's me done. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Ivor. If you have a question, yes, Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I have a very high regard for the War Graves Commission, in part for personal reasons, because my father was killed in Italy and lies at Assisi, in the cemetery there, and my uncle was killed defending Singapore, and he is commemorated in Kranji. I visited both cemeteries and been highly impressed. I just had one question, really. In your, I think, very first slide with all the statistics, you said there were 23,000 locations and 850 gardeners. I just wondered how that actually worked.
They get about a bit, don't they? To be honest, I don't have the official answer, but what I can say, because in happier times, as they say, I go to the French and Belgian battlefields twice a year. What you do tend to see in France is a gang of workers who will go around half a dozen or more cemeteries in a day, depending on how big the cemeteries are and how much work there is to do. But they descend on the cemetery and they do the mowing and the weeding and the raking up and all that kind of thing, take all the stuff away, and they're gone to the next one. So I can see how, with a relatively small number, they can cover an awful lot of ground. I don't know if that helps, but and what I don't know as well is whether on a local basis they take in local contract labour.
Okay, thank you. Next question will be Richard and then Tony.
Okay,
well, one was a comment, the other was a question. Given that all the areas where the cemeteries were from the First World War were largely hosting most of the battles of the Second World War, how did they sort of survive through all that, and were they respected by the various invading forces both ways?
Yeah. The first thing is that there were new cemeteries built because of the Second World War, because some of the fighting, particularly in France and in Normandy, for example, Normandy was really untouched in the First World War, but of course, huge number of casualties in the Second. So there were some new ones, but you're quite right. A lot of First World War cemeteries contain Second World graves, and in the fighting passed over them. You can see traces of the fighting. The Germans, particularly, I'm speaking to the Germans because that's an area that I know in northern France and Belgium. The Germans did not destroy them. The Germans respected them, but inevitably, as the fighting rolled across northern France, you did get stray cannon shells, mortar shells going off in the vicinity and so on. And I'm quite sure that local troops use some of the walls as cover. And so you do, I mean, if you go to Villers-Bretonneux, the great Australian memorial, you can see some evidence of Second World War damage, but it's not great. And in the main, the invading forces respected the cemeteries very, very well indeed.
So just one more. Yeah, I think you've answered the question, but my grandfather, who fought through both wars, died on Christmas Day 1947 of stomach cancer, but he seems to have acquired himself a Commonwealth War grave in Hatfield, and it was always a bit of a mystery to me how he managed to get that. I think you've sort of answered the question. Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, as the Americans would say, he kind of snuck in right at the end, didn't he?
Yeah.
But the other thing I wasn't able to say is that you do have, or your relatives have to show that your death was caused or brought forward by your war service. So my guess is that it wasn't just the fact that he died before the cutoff. My guess is that he must have had some underlying condition from his World War I service that, or indeed, maybe he was injured in the Second World War as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was in North Africa in the Second War and did undergo surgery at that point, but I think it was more for his cancer than for any war wounds, but it's a bit of a mystery, that one.
Oh, well, I mean, again, yeah, if he was being treated during the war and then subsequently died, if he was being treated in a military hospital during the war, then yeah, I can see that would be, an acceptable reason. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Final question to Tony.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you might have mentioned this, but I couldn't quite find it. Just could you explain where there's a grave, a gravestone, that there will be the correct remains, skeleton or bones of that individual, where they haven't found evidence of who the bones relate to. They just go on as a name on the memorial, the big memorial. And you mentioned one where there were 70,000 names. Would that include all the headstone names as well as the ones who hadn't been identified?
No, no. The memorials were only memorials to the missing.
Right.
And the commission had a lot of discussion about how they were going to deal with the missing, because when the war ended, there were 500 and some odd thousand graves known about, but there were more than 500,000 missing. So the number of missing from the First World War is colossal, and they weren't sure how to do it. The Australian representative at one point said that every man should have a grave, even if he wasn't buried in it. So they were suggesting that you have a kind of fake grave as a way of memorializing someone whose remains you couldn't find. Now that was clearly impractical. Again, just imagine the colossal amount of land that you'd be asking the French government to part with, because the French government has given that land, and the Belgians, has given that land to the UK in perpetuity. So they came up with the idea of creating these memorials. So every name that's on the memorial is someone who does not have a known grave anywhere. He may well be buried, but they don't know which grave he's in. Okay. And when someone is unidentified, then the procedure for the First World War, at least, was to put up a uniform headstone with the words "known unto God" on it. And sometimes at the top you have a soldier of the First World War, or sometimes you have a private of the Leicesters or something like that, where they got some kind of an identification. But that's the way it was done.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ivor. Vote of thanks to be given by Roger Vaden.
Thank you, President. Ivor, thank you so much for giving us such an interesting talk. What a huge and worthwhile organisation the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is. Your talk is very apposite, as the War Graves Week is coming up on the 21st of May, I understand.
Yeah, that's right.
I always remember the first time I became aware of a memorial. I was very young, younger than I am now, and living in Plymouth. There is a naval memorial on Plymouth Hoe, and I was amazed the first time I saw it as at the number of names inscribed on it. I guess most of those names were following on from what your comments. I've never been, the people have never really been brought back to a resting place, as they would have been lost at sea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've since found out there are, you say, 23,000 sites across the world. That's incredible. And all those stone masons, carpenters, gardeners, it's absolutely incredible, keeping them in such a good state. It's noteworthy from what you say, how many nationalities have been involved. I think it's very humbling to know how many fought for this country during those wars. It's one thing for the older generations to be able to remember their fathers and grandfathers, as we've heard from Chris and Richard, through the organisation, but it's so good to know how you remind younger generations of the sacrifices which have been made in the past by encourage them to go on tours around the various sites throughout the world. So thank you for reminding us of the legacy, which mustn't be forgotten. So I'd like to ask my fellow Rotarians to show their appreciation in what is now our usual way.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you very much, Ivor.
that's great.
Okay, attendance today, if everybody could just go ahead and unmute themselves, just so we can wrap up. Attendance today has been 25. I think it reached about 27, 28 earlier on, so that's a great turnout. Richard, if you'd like to give any updates, I presume the news is still looking good in terms of the hospital situation.
Yeah, well, yes, they've stopped even issuing bulletins now, so I think there are a handful of patients still with COVID, but that's about it. So that's where we are.
Good stuff. Great, excellent. Next meeting, we're going to be joined by Sir Peter Soulsby, the Mayor of Leicester, giving us a message from the Mayor's office. There are no meetings after lunch today, and this meeting stands adjourned. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, Parmdeep.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Ivor.